Entered the No Delusion Zone. I'm David Dubato. Today, my very special guests are Jonathan Sweet and Mark Toth. Jonathan is a retired U.S. Army colonel who served in the intelligence branch and, among other assignments, toured with the 101st Airborne Division and the Intelligence and Security Command, also known as INSCOM. He writes regularly for such publications as The Hill, the New York Post, Kiev Post, and other publications all around the world, as well as appearing on podcasts and international news platforms internationally. His partner today is Mark Toth. Mark is an entrepreneur, businessman, and journalist who specializes in writing about intelligence affairs and international affairs. He writes for the same publications, generally The Hill, the Kiev Post, New York Post, many, many others. And Mark can also be seen almost every day on international news and information platforms discussing the war in Ukraine, the Middle East, NATO, Europe, and of course, national security issues here at home in the United States. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome both of you gentlemen back to the No Delusion Zone. Thanks for coming on again, guys.
Yeah, David, thanks for having us back on.
Great to be here. Thanks, David.
My pleasure. As I was saying before we went live, it would be impossible not to talk about the results of the election in the United States and its relationship to possible continued U.S. support in Ukraine. So I think I'm going to have to start there. This is for either one of you, you guys. How do you predict that the Trump administration, come January 20th and his inauguration, is going to continue, or, as some believe, discontinue U.S. support for both Ukraine and NATO?
I'll start off, and then I'll let Mark chime in. Look, I think we've already seen his opinion towards Israel. Okay, he's already said he's going to back Israel. He's going to give him everything he needs. He understands Iran's a threat. He understands the threat that is to Israel concerning the proxies and stability in the region. So I think we have a solid understanding where he's going there. Ukraine's a little different though, and I think the messaging is awkward because you got the vice president-elect in some cases saying that we need to end the war and that we need to bring this to a some type of conclusion in which there is land exchanges and some type of prosperity. You've seen a couple plans that have been laid out. One plan called for a demilitarized zone. It called for 20 years of waiting, I guess, to get into NATO. And Trump, on the other hand, is in one breath, he's like, he supports Ukraine. In the next breath, he's not sure what he supports. What he doesn't support, though, is, in his opinion, is the lackluster support that the European countries have been providing. Again, from his perspective, providing in relationship to what the United States is providing. And I think he puts a lot of rhetoric out there designed to get their attention, to get them into action. And at some level, that has worked. The European Union's been coming together. They're talking about additional funds. They're talking about additional munitions. So at some level, they're concerned that the U.S. is going to pull. I don't believe he's going to pull. And I think we saw in the news 2 days ago that Trump actually supported Biden's decision to release that minimum ATACMS authorities so that they could strike targets in the Kursk region, Russian and North Korean targets that were threatening those forces. But I think the jury's still out. And as Mark and I wrote in a couple of our articles, it really comes down, I think, that national security team he puts around him and the type of advice that he gets from those people. He's got a strong national security advisor coming in. We're waiting, obviously, I guess, on the outcome of the Secretary of Defense. But JD Vance, again, he is the wild card, I think. But again, JD Vance is the vice president, he's not the president. Mark, what are your comments?
Yeah, no, I think, the jury's out until it's out. So we're not going to know until January 20th. But there are some encouraging tea leaves here to be read in terms of Ukraine. Just quickly, when it comes to the Middle East, clearly we're seeing a return to maximum pressure. This idea that Iran needs to be contained, defunded, and pushed back hard if necessary has been channeled, since the campaign itself and ever since Trump has won. It's basically told Netanyahu, you guys can do what you need to do. I think in terms of NATO itself, in terms of what Trump may do, the International Court of Justice may have just done NATO a favor. They came out today with arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as Benny Gantz, former defense minister. Meanwhile, someone by the name of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the leader of Iran, who's behind all of the intrigue and killings, et cetera, in the Mideast, goes scot-free, unindicted, no arrest warrants for him. So I have a feeling that Elise Stefanik, if she's confirmed as as the UN ambassador, is probably going to trump Trump's considerations about NATO by going after the UN, and maybe that's the target of his initial hire. In terms of Ukraine itself, I think you have to look at the people that are closest to him so far in this cabinet that he's putting together. Representative Mike Waltz, has been on record repeatedly saying the importance of winning this war in Ukraine. He's going to be his national security advisor, arguably the closest person in his inner circle on a daily basis, the guy that he reaches out to from his desk and grabs when he needs clarity. When you look at someone like John Ratcliffe, the incoming CIA director, same thing, strongly supportive of Ukraine in the past. And then Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State, albeit more distant, being based at Waggy Bottom, has that same mentality. So all the pieces are there, notwithstanding the J.D. Vance's in the background, are there to make sure that Trump is hearing the case for Ukraine. And I think, as John and I pointed out in articles, and we've mentioned in TV appearances of our own and podcasts, is that once Trump has full access to all of the intel data that he's not seen since January 2021, he's going to realize that he's in a very different world and that Putin is trying to eat his lunch. And I think that may yet come around. Yeah, the nude pictures of Melania that appeared, that's below the belt, that can get his ire up. Trump's an emotional guy. But, and the fact that Iran was trying to kill him is another aspect of it. But I think once he realizes just how much China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran have coalesced since he's left office, and how much they're colluding and working together to destroy American interests, I'm hopeful, we won't know, but I'm hopeful that he'll change approach.
Well, as you both know, though, Trump doesn't have a lot of, how can I say, the power of concentration. He's famous for not listening to intelligence briefings. He likes to have drawings, actually, and put them kind of in cartoonish type of briefing. He doesn't like to read a lot. He likes people to tell him what the intelligence briefings say, and when he's through, that's it. So I'm hopeful too. Trust me on this. I really, really, really am hopeful that he listens to the intelligence folks, the national security people that he is starting to surround himself with, and really does listen to at least the most important parts of the intelligence briefings. Having said that, either one of you, do you feel that the national security team he's assembling is going to connect the dots? And what I mean by that is, this better than most. There is I don't want to call it an axis of evil, but for lack of better terms, an axis of evil between Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, that are really kind of squeezing us in very, very sensitive areas. It's not just in isolation. Russia is attacking Ukraine. Iran is supporting the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah and on and on and on. Do you think his national security team not only gets that, which they probably do, but is going to be able to convince their boss that this is a connect the dots situation, and he can't just ignore it and do what he normally does, which is to just turn off all that kind of noise?
Certainly hope so. Look, and everything you just said is exactly what General Jack Keane says. If you're watching Fox News and you're listening to him on television, he says the exact same thing. The coalescence of these four adversaries and the manner in which they're going after the West, not just the United States. The United States is the figurehead. I got it, but going after the West and how they're approaching that. Look, and Mark and I have written this a number of times. If you want to address the problem, address the Russian problem first. If you defeat Putin in Russia, the Iran problem will eventually work itself out, because they're not going to have the financial support or the military support or the weaponology and technology that they have. Just look at some of the latest significant seizures of weapons caches in the Hezbollah region of Lebanon and Syria. All Russian equipment, all brand new. Same thing for the Sudan and the Sahel region. Russian equipment, Russian mercenaries doing Russia's bidding. You take care of Ukraine, you take care of Russia and Ukraine, it works itself out. China does not want to get involved in nuclear confrontation. China right now economically does not want to lose a competitive edge in the European theater. But that's what they're up against. So they are trying to hold back Russia. It's interesting though that China has approved, and you have to understand the relationship between China and North Korea. North Korea is not going to commit soldiers to Ukraine or to Russia without the approval of China. So China has looked the other way on that one. So it's interesting to see how that works. But again, I think that's applying pressure on NATO and trying to weaken NATO and draw NATO down, to separate NATO. But I do think the national security team that's coming in has all the information. They have a strong voice on the outside. Again, Keynes one, Petraeus is another, Hodges is another. They're constantly in the media. They're constantly talking about the atmospherics and what's happening. And they have to understand that. Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, and I wish we'd gotten this in the article that we wrote today for The Hill, but really, if you think back and you step back, Ukraine has become this decisive terrain of what we're calling World War III. Now, this isn't a World War III that looks like Hollywood's version of it. No mushroom clouds, no day after nightmare scenarios of how to live in a radioactive environment. But it's World War III by 1,000 different cuts. And I think as Trump comes up to speed, I hope, I should say, that he's going to understand that Ukraine really is that decisive terrain of that war. The stand that he makes is going to be important. And I think when he starts to look at the optics of things, of what this world looks like, what the world leadership looks like since he last was on that stage, if he was paying any attention to President Biden's trip to Peru just yesterday, you had President Biden next, in the back row. They claimed it was alphabetical by country, but he's in the back row, second to the end, standing there while President Xi Jinping is right next to the leader of Peru. And that's saying something because China has made great inroads in terms of investing in Central and South America. They're wanting to put a port, basically at the end of the world, if you will, to dominate that trading route. That's a critical outlet. So, I'm hopeful that once he's in office, whether the people have to draw pictures for him or literally connect the dot pictogram for him to see it, that he'll start to realize that this is all coming together and that they're all thinking he's going to be a chump, that they can outsmart him, that they're going to get him to look the other way and not realize this threat. And so I'm hopeful. And again, hopeful is the key word. We don't know. Trump's his own man. And I think anyone, including us, trying to predict him, you do so at your own risk. But I'm hopeful that he's going to realize that it's just a completely different environment. As John said, the atmospherics are different than what he left.
I agree with you. And I think the only way to get through to him is what my guest said yesterday. You're going to have to appeal to his vanity. That's it. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't have a whole lot of faith in Trump other than to piss him off and to make people think that they're out to get him and that he's going to look bad. He's going to look effeminate. He's not going to be the masculine, rocky character that are portrayed on all of the posters about him. And I'm shocked too, Jonathan, to be honest with you, that he didn't respond very, very forcefully to the nude pictures being released by the Kremlin. Not quite sure what that's all about. Maybe we'll know in the future. But I do think the way that this is going to work out for the good, if it does work out for the good, is to convince Trump that Putin is playing him. He's making him look like a fool, which he is, and he will in the future. But his national security team has to convince him of that. I'm sorry. I don't think Trump's going to ever connect the dots. He's not a connecting dots kind of a guy. But he will respond to being made fun of, belittled by someone, made to look like a fool on an international stage. And if they can do that at every step of the way, as long as they know that they're connecting the dots and what Trump's actions are going to accomplish in the long run, I think that there'll be a success. I want to, if I could, gentlemen, bring your attention to something I just read. It was just published in the Kyiv Post, about the Kremlin's 2045 plan to divide Ukraine and reshape the global power. This plan, it's been released before, but the Kyiv Post just posted this about how they intend, of course, on conquering all of Ukraine. They don't believe Trump is going to stop them, and they're going to divide it into three different sectors: the Russian territory, the pro-Russian state entity around Kyiv, and then in Western Ukraine, the disputed territories. But basically, and why I'm bringing this up, it all plays into their war against the West, not against the United States per se, which is the same thing that China is pursuing, and Iran and North Korea, again, connecting the dots. So I think this was a very illuminating article. It just stated to me the obvious. I don't know if either one of you have had a chance to see that, or how much of this has been published before, because to me it's well known, but to most people they've never heard about it.
Yeah, there were a lot of sound bites, if you will, on Twitter, X, the past couple of days, snapshotting that image that you're talking about, the three-colored image of Ukraine. Look, Putin just took a play out of Trump's book of The Art of the Deal, right? You come in strong, you come in with something outrageous, you come in with something completely unattainable, and then you back up on your negotiations. And I think that's exactly what they've done in this case. They're saying, this is our end state, and this is the only way, and this is the only thing we're going to accept.
Well, an old Soviet playbook action also.
Yeah, so it's a familiar technique, which is he's trying to negotiate from a position of power, but he doesn't have the position of power. Okay, he wants you to believe he has it. He shows that he has systems capabilities, but those systems fail often. He's losing on the battlefield. His only recourse on the battlefield right now is not, conventional against Ukrainian forces. It's just take the fight to the Ukrainian civilians. It's drop bombs on the center of Odessa, cluster munitions on the center of Odessa, killing civilians. Mark just said intercontinental missile being fired at a population center. That's his response. That's all he has. Okay, and he hides behind his nuclear capability. He used the intercontinental missile because what does that normally carry? It's capable of carrying nuclear warheads. So that was a message. That was a clear message to the Biden administration. I can fire this missile at will, and I can put a nuclear warhead on there. And oh, by the way, I just lowered the threshold for the use of nuclear warheads, right? He did that 2 weeks, or on Monday, I believe he signed a change in doctrine in Russia, all designed to influence who? Designed to influence Biden. And why is it influence Biden? Because Bob Woodward tells us in his book, War, that is exactly what every decision he makes is based upon. What will Russia do in its nuclear capacity to counter what we're doing? He even had his chairman of Joint Chief of Staff, Milley, call Gerasimov and say, please tell me what our lines of the sand are. When are you going to use nuclear weapons? And they use that basis for all their decisions. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, basically, you can call that a peace plan, but it was a capitulation plan that's being put forth. And so it's hard to take it seriously. Maybe in a moment of bipartisanship, and I say this jokingly, Trump could get Nancy Pelosi to come to that meeting with Putin and rip up that map in front of him, as she once did his State of the Union speech, because it's that preposterous. I think John said it adequately, but, and covered all the points. It's a talking point thing. It's trying to message the West. He's trying to send signals that he's winning. But he's not. He's got severe problems. His economy is in trouble, deep trouble. His main trading partner right now, China, is also having trouble. I don't want to get too far into the reads on that. But for instance, they've just had to approve $1.4 trillion from Beijing to fund local Chinese municipalities because they're saddled with debt from all of this growth in industry and commercial real estate that hasn't produced economic activity. And so China has its own problems in that regard. And Putin realizes that he's kind of up against a guardrail here now. And so from his standpoint, he may take a pause. He may want to try to negotiate something and get as close to that map as he can. But I would just caution everyone to remember, he's not going to stop until that map is his reality. And I don't believe the three zones. I think he's just playing Orban and Hungary for a fool. He's trying to peel off Romania. The idea that Romania and Hungary are going to get a chunk of Ukraine is not something that NATO would ever tolerate.
Well, I agree with you. And in fact, to me, it wasn't the map that really stood out to me, although that's the first thing you see. It was when I read further down, it's about connecting the dots again. It talks about the formation of a multipolar world and regionalization or chaos, which implies a weakening of the global order. And that is the most important point in this, and that is about connecting the dots. That is the goal of Russia, the axis of evil, if you will, between Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. It's not so much that they think that, or I believe that, or Putin believes that he's going to win the war militarily right now. It's about the effect, the chaos that he intends on inflicting upon the Western world, which, to be honest with you guys, is working out fairly well right now. It's not succeeding, but we're in more chaos than we have in a while. Although, yes, NATO has come together and things are looking better there. But I think that's the most important thing, that this is part of a global war against the West, not just the United States. So whatever the United States does under Trump in the next few months or year or two, it's not over. And in fact, it may increase the pressure against the rest of the West to defend against this push against chaos. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, real quickly, I'd point out something that, counterintuitive as it may seem, Trump's unpredictability, his own embracing of chaos, may be what's needed right now, because Ukraine's been caught in a purgatory. Just enough to survive, not enough to win. Biden has been very predictable. The Russians have been able to figure out, how to bluff him when it comes to nuclear weapons. John covered that well already. And I think that predictability has not only hurt Ukraine, but it's hurt Washington as well. And so right now, and again, counterintuitive, because I'm not someone who ultimately believes in chaos as a form of management or governance, it may be what's needed at this moment in time, ironically, to put Putin off guard, to make him wonder just how sure of a hand does he have, and how can he, sit back and predict what Putin may or may not do. John, you're the guy who spent 30 years connecting dots. Where does chaos come into when those dots get disconnected?
I'm with you, David, on the chaos theory. And it's disruptive across the globe, okay? And we're seeing it, and we've talked about this in a number of writings. We saw a coup in Sudan. We've seen multiple coups in the Sahel region. We're seeing disinformation all throughout Western Africa, okay? So we're seeing that. We're seeing still within Syria, we're still seeing Russia support Assad and suppressing the rebels, if you will, from eastern Syria from coming in. We're seeing the support to Iran. We're seeing Iranian support to who? Hezbollah and Hamas, and spreading anti-Israeli sentiment throughout the globe. We're seeing protests in Europe. We're seeing protests in North America. So, and once again, we're seeing pipelines, undersea pipelines being cut in the Baltic Sea. We're seeing a rise of Serbian nationalism again. And we're seeing, forced migration into Finland and into Hungary and into Poland, where Russia's pushing migrants to those areas to disrupt. We've seen fires, unexplained fires at weapons depots in Korea, throughout Europe, and in the United States. So it's alive and it's well and it's chaotic, because the FSB right now is the only winning hand that Russia has, okay? This conventional military is not a winning hand. The FSB is playing well. They do well in disinformation. They do well in sabotage. They do well in organization. That's the hand he's playing, and that is what he is using to try to weaken the resolve of the West.
Yeah, just real quickly, I'd point out that in terms of connectivity, and again, it's too early to conclude whether this is the case or not, but it could be that China was behind the cutting of those cables. The Irish Navy chased off Chinese ships near their international cables that they patrol as a country on behalf of the West. And so that connectivity is there. And that's something, again, one of those points of information that Trump's going to have to digest.
Well, coalescence again. Yeah,
I agree with both of you. I mean, Mark, you may be right. I mean, again, counterintuitively, maybe that's what we need. And of course, I wouldn't support this normally either, but things are so crazy right now that why not have an absolute madman in charge of the largest and most powerful military in the world, which now we have, or we will come January 20th. That certainly could put Putin off his game. Whether that's the best strategy in a normal world, absolutely not. But we're not in a normal world anymore. But then I agree with Jonathan. Of course, chaos is not the way to play the long game, probably. Although, again, Soviet and Russian tactics call for that. China calls for that. The Soviets and Russians have always been very good at disinformation, better than their military's ever been. They're better at sabotage and disinformation. And they're proving that today. And I'm sorry, the chaos that's spreading all over the world, you mentioned a number of them in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Europe. I'm not totally comfortable with what's happening, for example, in Europe, with the AfD making inroads all in Germany and the far right all over Europe in such liberal strongholds as Sweden, as the Netherlands, as Belgium, for God's sake. I'm going to do an interview with somebody in Slovakia and the Slovak government, where Fico is, best buddies with Putin. With the sabotage and arson and disinformation all over Europe, that's chaos, and it's not getting any better. And if Trump pulls back support from NATO, which I do expect he's going to do, how much, who knows? That's just going to increase the chaos and the sabotage and the disinformation in Europe. Putin's not going to stop. China is also part of that. I do believe, Mark, that they did cut that cable from what I've seen in the Baltics, and they benefit also to a degree from chaos in Europe, although, of course, they want to capture the market in Europe. But if America pulls out, China's going to capture the economic market in Europe. So I'm not a fan of chaos, although I do agree with you, Mark, that right now I would be willing to gamble that the chaos master in chief, Trump, may be the best antidote we have, at least in the short term. But what do I know?
Yeah. And I'd also point out, I think it's important because I get asked this a lot, especially in Eastern European TV, it's important to separate Trump's hyperbole from the actions ultimately that he takes. And someone did a great expose on how two sides of America hear different things. One side gets it, this guy exaggerates, he goes over the top because he's trying to make a point. He's not trying to be, exact. The other side just says, oh, no, he's lying. And can't see past, the hyperbole or the exaggeration. I'm not defending it. I like presidents who speak precisely and would prefer that modus operandi, but that's not who he is. So from that standpoint, if you do look at his statement when he announced his NATO ambassador, it is interesting that he called on his ambassador to be strengthening NATO. So that goes in the face of different commentary that's been out there that he wants to destroy it. I think if you get past the hyperbole, what he wants is that for the rest of Europe to pay their fair share in his mind. And Poland in many ways has set that gold standard by getting close to 5%. They're anywhere on any given moment between 4 and 5% defense spending as a percentage of GDP. And I think that's what he's maneuvering at. I'm hopeful that he'll get it. The one other comment that I'd make about trying to understand Trump in all of this, because he's the guy that we have. We don't get to go back and have a do-over. He's going to be the guy that takes charge. I do think, and again, I'm not glorifying him. I'm a political independent. I don't take sides here. But I do think we learned a lot about the man during the assassination attempt. And that's something that maybe Putin and others heretofore have misunderstood. John knows what it's like to be under fire. I was a victim of a terrorist attack when I was young. And there are two types of people in those situations. There's the people that stand up and act in defiance. Hell no, you're not going to shoot at me. I'm coming back at you. And then there are people that run and just run from the fight. He showed that he was willing to get back up and stand back up. And I think that's something that Putin potentially and Xi may be underestimating him. And maybe Trump didn't even know he had that in him. You don't know until you're in that critical life and death situation. So now don't get me wrong. I don't want to come off as a walking advertisement for Trump. There's a lot about the man I do not like. But I do think we found out something about him that may be predictive of how he acts going forward if he perceives both he and the country's under attack.
Well, I can say this from being a prior police officer and somebody that's been in combat under fire. There are also another type of person, a psycho. People that are psychotic also don't care about being shot at. We have an expression, no brain, no pain. And you can beat somebody who's a psychotic with a lead pipe, and they're going to say, bring it on some more. Been there. Trust me, as a police officer. And so I understand what you're saying, Mark, but obviously I don't like Trump. I don't trust him. But he is our president. And I had a huge interview about that yesterday. He's our president. He won. I'm not going to say he's not my president. That's ridiculous. He is, come January 20th. And I'm going to do everything I can to get him to defend and support and be the best president he can be, and support our allies, support Ukraine, but mostly support America, really support America, not burn it down. So I get it. But as far as him being, finding some inner strength, I think he might have found some inner psycho. I'm sorry. He's not a stable man. He's not. You'll never get me to say that. I'm sorry. I'm an independent. I'm a lifelong Republican, by the way, until Trump. And now I'm a lifelong independent. So I just had to get that out. I hope what you're saying is true, Mark. I hope a lot of things are true or not true, actually, about Trump. But one thing, I have to say this, I'm sorry. Anne Applebaum, I'm sure you've both heard about her. She's written a book about authoritarianism. And one thing that she's found in an intensive, exhaustive study is that authoritarians rarely say things that they don't mean. And when they get into a position where they can eliminate all the opposition and place the loyalists that are loyal only to them, not to the country, in positions of power, like the Defense Department, intelligence agencies, attorney general offices, and law enforcement, they do exactly what they said they're going to do on the campaign trail. So as far as hyperbole, I pray that you are right, Mark. I tend to think that Trump is going to do what he said he's going to do, because he has both houses of Congress and the Supreme Court in his pocket right now, and he's appointing loyalists who would never have those positions except that they are bootlickers to Donald Trump and they owe him their lives. And that's all I want to say about that, because I'm sorry, it's too important. It's too important what's going on right now. And after January 20th, I don't have a prediction, except I pray for the United States of America.
Yeah, no, I get that. And it's a fair assessment. I mean, I don't think any of us can step back and say, look, Trump is a man, Trump is a leader, is going about this the right way. But again, we don't get to re-choose here.
No, I agree. I agree.
And I think, to try to relitigate the election and try to use all the same complaints that didn't win the election is just a waste of time. And so from John and my perspective, in terms of trying to advocate for certain changes in policy, we're taking what we have to work with. The clay is in front of us.
You guys are doing the right thing. Leave it to me to get the histrionic, passionate appeals out there and say what I do, because after all, I'm Italian and this is the no delusion zone. So you can't win. That's just the way it is.
I'm married to a Sicilian, so
okay. Well, you know the kind. Right. Okay, let's get back to mostly non-political issues. The Biden release finally of the long-range ATACMS and the, to me, unbelievable approval of landmine use in the last, I think, even 48 hours is just, how can I say, it's something, to say the least. Both of you, please join in. What's to make of that? Is this going to make a difference? I don't even want to get into the fact this should have happened 2.5, almost 3 years ago. What effect, if any, are the long-range ATACMS going to have on Ukraine's position in the war?
So look, we wrote about this early in the war. Yeah. The strategy that the Biden administration had, and the strategy was first announced as weaken Russia. I mean, Lloyd Austin put that out there, and it was followed by what Mark and I would say is just enough. Get Ukraine just enough to survive. Okay, so that means defensive weapons, and get them just enough that they can survive, but not necessarily win. They don't want to win. They're afraid of a win. Okay, so in my opinion, the ATACMS use in Russia against Russian soldiers and North Korean soldiers is more just enough. Okay, because they know there's 50,000 of them, or at least that's what the media tells you. There's 50,000 of them poised to counterattack, a counteroffensive in the Kursk region and push Ukraine out. Biden doesn't want that, so Biden authorized the release of ATACMS to strike those targets and only those targets. So once again, just enough. It's like Clinton saying, I smoked the pot, but I didn't inhale. Just enough, okay? So I got it. That is a capability they have, and they've used it twice on two very successful targets. The first was an ammunition depot. Why? Because that ammunition is going to be used against them in the front lines. It's also going to be a storage facility where North Korea had put ballistic missiles that are being fired at Ukrainian cities. Great target. The second target was a Russian headquarters. Okay, 6 Storm Shadows hit that Russian headquarters and killed a number of senior personnel. Maybe there was, and we understand there was a senior North Korean general in the Kursk area at that time who's supposed to be leading the effort for North Korea. No reports on the damage or the KIA, but he may have been in that location too. Now, the other piece that you talked about, the landmines. Okay, got it. A defensive weapon, not an offensive weapon. Again, not enough to win. They're not putting Ukraine in a position to win. Ukraine needs unrestricted access to precision deep strike capability. You call the weapon system, I don't care. But that also includes fast movers, jets, F-16s, maybe A-10s, MiG-29s that Poland is trying to give. But they need that capability because they are winning the close fight. They are slaughtering Russians. 727,000 Russians have been killed. In the past 3 months, 70,000 Russians have been killed. They are very efficient in killing Russians, okay? But 1,500 a day, 2,000 a day. The next day it's another 2,000. Next day it's another 2,000. Next day it's another 2,000. Where are they coming from? They're coming from Russia. Where are they staging? What airheads, what railheads, what seaports? Attack those. That's why they need precision deep strike capability, to attack those areas, to interdict Russian forces before they arrive on the battlefield, so their forces don't run out of ammunition, so they can make progress. If all you're doing is fighting from a foxhole because the next day another 2,000 are coming at you, you'll never progress. You're going to have to fall back because you're not going to have the ammunition or the manpower. Eventually, you're going to run out of people. The only way to stop the flow is to kill them in Russia, and that's the piece that's missing. Interdiction. They're missing the interdiction piece. The other piece, obviously, and look, they're not going after the airfields with those weapon systems. They'll use their Neptune missiles to go after those airfields. But ballistic missile launch sites, drone launch sites, all fair game. They should all be on the table. And I do not know why the Biden administration will not let that happen. In the meantime, what, 2 nights ago, 210 ballistic missiles, rockets, artillery, drones struck all throughout Ukraine. And you know why? Because you didn't defeat the weapon system 6 months ago. It's still firing the same missile and probably from the same site. So I'll get off my horse. Mark.
Yeah, no, and John and I are actually working on a piece. I don't know the outlet yet. I think some of what we're seeing is that the Biden administration at this point is in legacy mode. And they're trying to play the clock out. They just want to hand it off come January 20th, and they want to be able to say, Ukraine didn't lose on our watch. And that's really this limit of what they're willing to do. So it's just enough to make sure that they don't get defeated, during the remaining term of their office. I think if you look at this aid package that just came out, if you believe the current reporting in the New York Times, they're saying that up to 80% right now of Russian casualties, again, that number seems a little off to me. John can comment on that in a second. But 80% are coming from drone strikes, not from artillery, not from mortar fire, not from HIMARS. And that seems out of whack, which is telling you, if it's true, or even if it's close to being true, that there's not been enough, supplies of 155, 105 millimeter type artillery shells. There's not been enough mortar shells that have been supplied, and that they're having to get adaptive, creative in terms of how they counter Russian advances. And so it tells me that the Biden administration continues to be in this reactive mode. We're never proactive. It doesn't seem like we can ever get ahead of the curve of what Ukraine's needs are on the battlefield, but we just react to them. And that's just been part and parcel to them. I just don't see that changing, and it's tragic. I think the war is pretty much like it is, unless there is a Russian breakthrough at some point, because Ukrainian morale gets crushed. I think we're seeing the war like it's going to be. There's not going to be any great change in dynamic until Trump takes office. John, your thoughts on that 80%? Because that one stuck out at me. We've not had a chance to talk about it yet.
80% is high, but look, if it's probably closer to the 60 or 65%. But look, if you're an X guy and you're watching these videos on TV, I mean, there must be 20 or 30 X videos every day different, but you can't tell if it's from yesterday, today, 6 months ago. but they're showing those drones hitting tanks, hitting artillery, hitting troops in the open. So that's one thing. The anti-tank mine has been very successful. And I'm like, they're up to what, 8,000 tanks and armored personnel carriers that have been destroyed. All that is there, but it keeps coming. And again, if you can't stop it from coming, you're stuck in this Groundhog Day. If you're an infantryman in a fighting position, it's the same thing every day. They keep coming, and you got to shut it down. One of the things that frustrated me immensely on Monday when I saw an interview with Jake Sullivan on PBS, and Jake Sullivan wanted to blame Ukraine's current stalemate because of manpower. He said they didn't have enough troops that were fighting, and that's why they weren't being successful. And the answer is that's not the answer. Okay, the reason why they're not being successful is because they don't have the offensive tools they need to win the war. Okay, the reason why they're fighting the defense is because you've only given them defensive weapons to fight with. They can't take the fight to Russia the way they need to take the fight. Look, they took the fight to Russia in the Kerch region. Let's also understand they experienced great success, but Kerch wasn't heavily defended, and they were able to progress into Kerch. Russia's had time to reposition now. Again, ATAC was being introduced to take care or to alleviate that problem to some degree. But nonetheless, the problem still in the Donbass region is they're running out of manpower, they're running out of weapon systems, and Russia's not running out of bodies, okay? These people, in some cases, 12 days ago, were in college, pulled out of their classes, put into a uniform, onto a train, marched out to the site, and we're told, go forward. And oh, by the way, there's barrier troops behind you. So if you come back, we're going to kill you. If you go forward, you're going to get killed too. So you're going to get killed. That's the mentality we're up against.
They're not going to bleed out the Russian army. I mean, they won World War II by an endless supply of bodies. They're taking them from the indigenous tribes in Central Asia and Eastern Russia, people who have no say, who can't complain, who can't protest, because if they do, they're in prison or worse. And that's where these people are coming from. And as you know, he's intentionally not recruiting, for the most part, from Moscow and St. Petersburg. It's from these indigenous people or the regular poor people in Russia who, again, some do enlist, of course, because they need the money. They're poor, dirt poor, literally. But they're not going to bleed the Russian army out. Like you said, Jonathan, they need to hit the rail hubs, the logistics sites, the command and control centers. We've known this, you've known this, and even Jake Sullivan has known this for 3 years. The reason they're not winning is because of Jake Sullivan. If you're listening, go to hell. I mean this. He's the reason Ukraine is bleeding out every single day and dying a little bit more every day. What about the reports in the Times, the Kiev Post, and many, many others about the fact that only about 10% of the ammunition and weapons that Jake Sullivan has sent to Ukraine is actually in Ukraine? It's still in the pipeline somewhere. Now, that may be not exactly true, but even if it's anywhere near that little amount, well, there's another reason that they're running out of 155 and everything else. They're not getting it. They don't have it. It's disgraceful. Let me ask you this. We're running out of time, and I do want to cover a couple of different things. Jonathan, you have the intelligence background out of the two of you folks. What do you think about the current situation in Russia right now with the intel services, with the security services, and Putin? Is there anything that's happening there right now that is endangering Putin, or is he as solid as ever, and there's really no danger, no signals coming out of the Kremlin that looks that he's in any danger anytime soon? What's your thoughts on that?
Mark and I have talked about this pretty much often. He has a tight circle of FSB around him, right? So getting access to him is difficult. It's his vulnerability is when he leaves the Kremlin. His vulnerability is when he gets into that car. His vulnerability is when he gets onto that train and he's outside of the Kremlin. We've written a couple articles in which we think there were assassination attempts against him that failed. One of those was in December of 2022. He was going to a tank producing factory. The senior man in charge of that producing factory, I can't remember his name right now, was a retired 3-star general who also happened to be like a NATO liaison at one time. So he had extensive ties to the West, senior general officers in the West. There was some thought that there may have been an attempt on Putin's life had he gotten there. That individual died, interesting enough, the day prior to Putin's arrival. And we wrote about this. Mark, that was in The Hill, right? We talked about
Right.
what was the movie
Yeah, they
with
had
Tom
plowed the
Cruise?
snow. They had the streets ready.
Yeah,
Ready
it
for
was ready,
time.
and then it canceled at the last minute. So the
Right.
movie with Tom Cruise, what was the name of the movie again? Valkyrie? Yeah. We use Valkyrie as the background for that particular setup and how he could have, because of his reach within NATO, but his reach within senior officers that had worked for him within the Russian military, how he could have pulled that off. And I think there's
Real quick, if someone wants to Google it, it was Valkyries over the Kremlin was the article.
is in The Hill. So we looked at that. But to get back to your question, David, yeah, I think he's vulnerable. And maybe not necessarily from a military coup. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen within the FSB, or it happens within the oligarchs. Because again, we understand that Russia's a mafia state, right? We understand that money flows into the oligarchs. When the oligarchs are happy, everyone's happy. And the oligarchs, the Chapos, fund Putin. When that money flow stops flowing and the oligarchs start running out of money and the pressure starts coming back on Putin, on people, particularly within Moscow and St. Petersburg, as you alluded to, when they start to feel the pressure and the pain, I believe that Putin is exposed, and he's close right now. As Mark said, the economy is failing. It hasn't failed, but it's failing, and all the indicators are there that it is. Okay, now he has some strong allies, China and India, that can pick up the tab for a little while. But people invest in winning hands. They don't typically invest in losers. So if that continues, I see him being vulnerable. Mark, what are your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, I probably differ a little bit from John on that. From my perspective, if you can have 700,000 plus of your young men and women killed and maimed in battle, you're pretty tightly in control. Now, granted, there are severe issues with the Russian economy. Inflation, at least what they're reporting, is 10% per year. But many prices that affect consumers are, 25% inflation, are skyrocketing. I mean, they literally, David, are locking up butter in their supermarkets because people are stealing it because they can't afford to buy it. And that's happening in the major cities now. So certainly there's those pressures. And as a former economist by background, when you start to look at Russia, which has become a closed economy, not having trade, it's created a situation whereby all of the investment opportunities that anyone has with their capital is all directed internally. And what does that cause? Price rises, because you've got the same people bidding for real estate, for houses, for cars, and the like. And so that's creating a bubble that at some point is likely to break. So he's facing a severe economic problem that will break at some point. Now, where I differ a little bit with John is that I think when it comes to how this is coalesced, I think China realizes it's in their best interest to keep Putin afloat, and that if they have to, they're going to bail him out to the extent that they can. And we just haven't seen. I mean, obviously, Prigozhin came the closest with the revolt that he did, but they still didn't get that close to it. I'd also caution the oligarchs are really down the totem pole when it comes to people of power. They don't have their own paramilitary groups. They don't have the kinetic means of taking out someone like Putin. You really, and I'm not the one who came up with this, but when you look at Russia as a state, you really need to think of it as the FSB with a country attached to it and a military attached to that country. They are the power base. And so if you're, trying to read tea leaves going forward, it's when that dissatisfaction starts to happen at the FSB level that then I think you could argue that Putin's in trouble. But we've seen no signs of that. He's had none of that. What did they call it in Roman times? The guard. I can't think of the right word right now.
Praetorian Guard.
Praetorian Guard, right? So far, we've not seen cracks in his Praetorian Guard. Hey, John, since I differed a bit with you, I'll punt it back to you in case you disagree.
No, and look, I'm on board with what Mark says about the FSB. That's his inner circle. That's his strength. That's what keeps him in power. When you start seeing cracks in that is when you start to see the threat to Putin. But the military is not gonna rise up and overthrow him. Not now, they're not. I think there may have been an opportunity in December of 2022 based upon the personality, but that's not going to happen. We'll see. And it's gonna be a hard winter for Russia too. You know, a number of their, the gas facilities, oil facilities have been destroyed. A lot of the inner works infrastructure for some of the key cities is down. So there's gonna be a lot of pressure on him to do things internally, domestically, outside of Ukraine. So we'll see. We'll see. It would be nice if Russia could solve their own problem, and we didn't have to do it for them. But we'll just have to wait and see.
For the final question, let's move outside Ukraine. Not something I normally talk about, but it's important, certainly. And that's the Middle East. After the Trump administration takes over on January 20th, where do both of you foresee American support for Israel going? And if it goes the way that we probably all expect that it will, what does that portend for the increase of a widening war in the Middle East?
I'm not sure how the war widens in the Middle East. It's already wide. I mean, it's already in Yemen, it's already in Iran, it's already in Syria, Iraq, and it's already there. Look, well, I think we already know he's going to be all behind Israel. And everyone he's putting into positions around him or nominated, at least before confirmation, are all pro-Israel too. So Israel's going to get what Israel needs. I see, and Mark talked about the maximum pressure that they've spoken to. I see, again, if you could take Israel or Iran off the map, off the board, if you could take, in a game of risk, take Iran off the map, you take Russia off the map, you're going to solve about 2/3 of the problems in the world. Okay? You put Iran at bay and you let Israel follow up on those negotiations that they were doing with Saudi Arabia. The Abraham Accords, extend that to where the Sunni Muslim nations are signing those treaties, those peace accords, those trade agreements. I think you can find, possibly in our lifetime, some form of peace and cooperation in the Middle East. And I think that's what he's aiming for. And you only do that, I think, if you can get the Ayatollah out of there, you can defeat the IRGC, and the Iranian people may be able to rise up behind their crown prince, who keeps showing up, making gestures about wanting to go back to Iran to lead that country. The world would be a better place if the Ayatollah and the mullahs were not in charge.
Let me ask you this, and this is for both of you. If the Trump administration does increase, or continue at least, strong support for Israel, will that help the situation there? Will it get the mullahs out of Iran? Will it change the dynamic in the area? Will it cause the Iranian people to rise up? I mean, will that change the dynamics, or will the shooting just go on for an untold period of time? What are your thoughts on that specifically?
Look, so Iran's running out of proxies, right? They've lost Hezbollah, or for losing Hezbollah, they've lost Hamas. They're going to go shopping for proxies to do their dirty work. They don't want to confront the West. They don't want to confront Israel on their own. If Iran continues this development towards a nuclear weapon, Israel's not going to tolerate that. The Biden administration has, up till now. The Trump administration is not going to tolerate that either. And I think what you're going to see is you're going to see those type of facilities get targeted. I think you're going to see more IRGC get targeted. Why? Because IRGC is the trainer of the proxies, of the terrorists that are doing all the business. So I think it comes down to IRGC is the first target, and then once you get the IRGC down, you may see inner workings with the Iranian military. Remember, the Iranian military and IRGC are two separate functions.
Yeah, Iranian Revolutionary Guards, for those that may not know the acronym.
Absolutely. No, I do see opportunities for the Iranian people to take control, but they're not going to be able to take control if the mullahs are still in charge. They're not going to be able to overthrow the IRGC. They're going to need assistance. But I don't think that's the end state right now for Israel. The end state right now for Israel is that Iran doesn't have a nuclear capability. And I think it's going to lead to that. That's going to eventually lead to the fall of the mullahs in the IRGC. Mark, what do you think? Mark's much closer to this than I am. Mark?
Yeah, as someone who grew up in the Mideast and is still tied to the area, I go crazy when I hear people say, we fear it turning into a wider regional war. I don't know how this war can get much wider than it already is. And if you go back, just as all roads once led to Rome, all roads right now in the Mideast in terms of strife lead back to Tehran. And in that, if you take care of Tehran, you take care of the Houthis. If you take care of Tehran, you take care of Gaza, I mean Hamas. If you take care of Tehran, you take care of Hezbollah, and you end as well any machinations that may be at play with the PLA and the West Bank in terms of supporting them. I mean, Iran is a key player in that regard. And many Sunni Arab states would argue, thank God if that comes about soon, because they don't want to see this continued chaos from the Shias that are inflicting problems for their own country. I think Egypt's on board with it. Saudi Arabia is on board with it. They're not going to say this publicly, but privately, they're there. I think if there's any kind of wild card at play that Trump's going to have to deal with in the Mideast, though, is actually coming from the north, a man named Erdogan in Turkey. Because interestingly, Hamas got kicked out of Qatar. There's different reports. Some say they left after Trump was elected. Some say no, it had been in the works before. Regardless, the important point is where they went. They're in Istanbul. And so it's telling you that Erdogan is continuing to be willing to meddle. And he's been in Israel's face a lot over the actions in the Gaza Strip. He's clearly trying to win the Muslim street in the Mideast, and he's a wild card there. And obviously, and John knows this part of the Mideast better than me, but his own war against the Kurds, in terms of Iraq and the like. So, from that standpoint, I think the opportunity is there. As John said, for Israel, that end state is no nuclear weapon. They're not going to tolerate it. I think Trump will help. At this point, to best of my understanding, is that Israel only has access to 2,000-pound bombs. Those are not deep enough as bunker busting bombs. You need something more like a 20,000 to 25,000-pound bomb to get deep into those facilities and Natanz to disrupt their centrifuge capability of spinning and enriching uranium. They need that. And I think Trump is likely to give that to them. So from that standpoint, I think if we start to break down the Middle East, what does it look like with a Trump going forward? I think what you'll see is a concerted effort to starve, economically Iran again, maximum pressure. That's going to take some work to keep China out of that mix. We're trying to make up for it. And then you're going to also start to see Israel becoming more capable. Clearly they have the capability with tactical nukes, but no one wants to go there. They're going to become more conventionally capable of going after these targets that need to take out Iran's situation. And so I think that's a good thing. And then I think the thing we just have to look out for is what do the Russians continue to try to do in Syria? They not only have that port in Tartus, they're trying to build one in Tobruk, which is to the west of Egypt. And their machinations, not only in terms of being able to control the Mediterranean more in and around the Mideast, but also to supply the Sahel and the paramilitary groups operating there. So, from that standpoint, I see it as two things. Solve Iran, you solve most of the problems that are facing them, but then don't get caught off guard. We've got to stay focused on how to contain Turkey and any machinations that Erdogan might have to keep creating problems between Israel and its neighbors.
Yeah, the phrase "a wider war" was not the best choice of words. I guess what I meant, and you covered this right now, Mark, is the possibility of Israel using a tactical nuke. And as you said, that's probably not in the cards because the Trump administration probably will give them heavier bunker busting bombs to get to the facilities if they ask for it. And so really there would be no need for nukes. Last words, gentlemen. I'm going to wrap it up with that question, but if you have any last thoughts on anything we discussed, please let me know.
Yeah, real quick, and then I'll let John get the last word here. Yeah, Israel's mentality since the beginning with nukes has been, it's more like if we die, you die. That's the mentality. I don't see them using, unless they felt it was an existential question for them, I don't see them using tactical nukes as a measure of first resort. I think you would see them conventionally trying to take it out. Israel's got enough problems on the global stage as is. They don't want to be the first power since the US in World War II to actually use a nuclear weapon. So I think that's something they're likely to avoid at all possible costs. But then again, right, if they think that their country's life is at stake, they'd use it if that's the only way to prevent them from being destroyed. But that's all I've got on that. John?
Yeah, look, my parting comment would be this: the Ukraine can win this war. Ukraine has everything that they need. I mean, intestinal fortitude, adaptability, ingenuity, but they can only win it if they're given the right tools. And we all know that the right tools are offensive weapon capabilities. And the Trump administration could come in on day one and announce the release of authorities for Ukraine to put that ATACMS anywhere they want to put it. As long as there's a threat, an imminent threat to them or to the Ukrainian people, they can use that weapon system. Right now, I think Mark and I think the number is 50 rounds of 50 munitions, 50 pods that they have available. But we need to get them more, okay? And we need to get that into their hands. And we need to release restrictions so they can fight their fight, and we need to get behind them. And I think Trump wins just by coming in, releasing authorities on day one. It then starts pushing additional assets that are needed to remove somebody. That means you got tanks, armored personnel carriers, 155, 105, all that. But it begins first with releasing authorities. And I think if Trump's going to make an impact on day one, that's the impact. Release authorities.
Well,
yeah, I got one
ahead,
other.
Mark. No, Mark, please.
One other quick comment. I think too. I think there's something to be learned about all of this as a country. And again, not to be political, but I really do think as a country, we have to ask, what has been the point of all of this? President Biden has not made it clear. Why are we in this fight? What is the end state that we want out of it? It's just war into perpetuity. I mean, for a man who came into office saying, I don't want a forever war, I want to end a forever war. I mean, he's created, in a way, a forever third world war. And I think as a country, we have to ask, why wasn't this man out on Air Force One constantly selling why this was an essential war, why in many ways it's an existential war in terms of our way of life, Western liberty, why he wasn't doing that more? I think we know why. I think age, impairment, and the like, he just wasn't capable of doing it. But I think we as a country have to realize we can't do this. We can't allow our leaders to get away with this. This is not a Democratic issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's just a question that if American leadership is going to exert itself on the international stage, there has to be a purpose to it, and there has to be an end state. And we've seen none of it out of it. But that's kind of my parting comment there.
Well, this country's been around this bend before. It was called the Vietnam War. And there was no end game stated there either. And 58,000+ young Americans died, and many more were wounded for that lack of clarity. And here we are again. And I could not agree with you more. And I have written and spoken till I'm blue in the face about the same thing. I am just irate that the Biden administration never articulated an end goal in the war in Ukraine. They never did. If anything, it was just to survive another bloody day, and that's worse than nothing. So I will leave that at that, except for the very last parting shot, which I agree with both of you on this point. Donald Trump won the election. He will be our next president come January 20th, and we, as Americans, need to stand behind him and make sure he does the very best job possible, period. Whether you want to call that an opposition to him, support for him, whatever you want to call it, we need to get behind our new president. And if he makes mistakes, you bet, call him on it every minute of the day. But until then, we need to support him, especially in regards to what we're talking about today, which is of international importance, both the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, and working with all of our allies and connecting the dots to see what the other side are trying to do against the West. We need to confront that as a nation and as a group of allies. And the only way to do that is to support Trump. And I will leave my comments on with that statement. And guys, thank you again for a great discussion, and let's do it again soon.
All right, David. Hey, thanks for having us back on.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
You bet. Take care, stay safe, and stay sane.